Okay.
Swati, I'm really enjoying this dialogue, and I love the perspectives that you bring. They're so refreshing. So now I want to try to do like a bit of a balancing act here. You touch on so many amazing and interesting points. I'm going to try to interweave and interlock these, if you'll indulge me.
Let's do it.
Okay. So we talked about the multilateral and the public sector views. COP. We talked about the youth voice. Talked a little bit about the private sector.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pick up on a little nugget you mentioned earlier around the SBTi and the role of NGOs helping to craft this initiative and the raging success around engagement that represents or is represented by SBTi.
Yeah.
So science-based targets initiatives. Can you contextualize that for me around the success?
Yeah.
How many companies now have science-based targets that are subscribed to the SBTi?
Ooh.
Like ballpark.
Absolute numbers. But so I can tell you about Singapore for sure. So Singapore is 41 now, which is a phenomenal growth. And if you look into the sectors, you have a lot of real estate and build sector, which is a huge composition of Singapore's carbon emissions.
Absolutely.
So it's a very good indicator. It's not companies on the fringe. These are deep sectors that are setting this up. You have ICT, you have all the data centers that companies are running. They're actually starting to say, you know what? This trajectory has to go down.
Right.
We actually can't operate in this market if we don't decouple from carbon emissions. So that's within Singapore market. Globally,
what about globally? Yeah.
Globally, I think in Asia Pacific, Japan is one of the largest sort of has the largest signups from corporates. I think today now it's 80% of global market share that comes under SBTi in one form or the other. Whether it's approved targets or not, there's a difference. But there's been this massive uptake of target validation. And I want to make clear here, SBTi is not the police. And I think it's important to understand, because a lot of people believe SBTi is sort of the end all. If you sign on to SBTi, you're golden.
High five, guys. We've solved
and I don't think there's actually a lot of area for complacency. But what SBTi does is saying, if you're saying you're net zero, are you genuinely in line with the science? And the fact that so much of today's market share is actually now aligned to that trajectory is recognizing, and both near term and long term, I think that's the winning piece. And I
think so too. And it needs to be commended, because a lot of folks from my side, the markets piece, are critical, and I want to get to that in a second. But I think we need to pay dues where they're deserved.
Yeah.
And SBTi has, like you said, I think the number that I heard, so clearly this increase, was that 75% of publicly listed companies have signed up to SBTi globally. And that number that blew my mind when I heard that, because you were talking about the apathy and kind of feeling, oh man, you gave the Christina Figueres example of effectively feeling defeated effectively.
Yeah.
And this actually gives me energy to know that companies are aligning their goals and commitments and saying, okay, we want to be a stakeholder in this engagement piece. And it's also great from the kind of the macro picture. We've got public sector engaging with an increase, like you talked about the stock take, we're talking about increase in ambition and ratcheting that up.
Yeah.
But now the private sector is also actively engaging, and that's an amazing signal. Then you talked about the youth voice, and that's the bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
And so now you get this convergence of all of these different forces essentially helping to drive transformation and change.
And I think that's a really good way to put it. So you have the youth voices and the general civil society.
Yeah, let's call it civil society, where the owners of the future are the youth voice.
But I would also say consumers, and employees. These are individual voices who recognize. So there's...
And kids effectively lobbying their parents. Let's not also be flippant about that. It's super important. When you see your child and they talk about something so passionately, you change. It's an incentive to change.
And you have individuals, and obviously that's one. This is all, by the way, guided by science in the background, which is the beauty of today's world institutions. And then you have governments saying, you know what, we've signed up to this treaty and we're changing. So then corporates in the middle are there, and there's two kinds of corporates. One who are panicking, or who are trying to change systems, and they're struggling and it's costing them, but it's okay, it's part of the process. And then there are some corporates who are like, you know what, I accept it. Let's see what we can do with this opportunity. And those corporates
embracing change
are there. They exist, and they are really what they're setting the standard for what a successful corporate model in the future looks like.
Completely.
Yeah. And I do believe they are the ones who are leading the pack who are not just questioning, the systems, the way they work, but they're talking about resilience. They're talking about their impact in society. The impact they're measuring is not how much carbon emission. They're trying to measure how much they're benefiting society by being in it.
It ultimately comes down to social license to operate. Like they are stakeholders in a society, in an economy. Right. They are employers. They're people that shape these identities that are a corporation, and they're trying to do things that are transformative for the better of society. Great. High fives. Like, you should be commended. Can I just pick up on one bit that you said around, I completely agree. There are companies that are leaders and there are laggards. Great. And I think, like in quality, right, and in life, there's a spectrum. Yeah. And ultimately, there needs to be a transformation and a move forward. Yeah. SBTi is doing a good job of this. Oxford Principles advocates essentially for a similar trajectory where there's a migration from avoidance on the tech base, represented by renewables, towards nature-based avoidance, so ultimately nature-based removals, and then tech-based removals, et cetera, right? And so it's like a technology waves that are essentially moving forward at different rates and essentially advocating towards long and permanent sequestration. Yeah. Awesome. I talked about that recently with Alvin from Pure Earth, and we talked and unpacked the role of carbon dioxide removals specifically. The bit that I wanted to talk about is essentially, okay, SBTi set that North Star. It's engaging effectively with corporates, and corporates that are at the forefront of it, that vanguard, are our leaders. But I think that there's a middle pack who are effectively looking for instruction. Yeah. And the one criticism that I think that folks on my side of the fence, the market practitioners, have of SBTi is that there is not yet, I don't think that this is a permanent thing personally, I'd love to hear your voice, around the role for markets, specifically beyond chain value mitigation, whatever you want to call it, but carbon markets in particular. Yeah. And right now, SBTi has done a consultation piece, but they're effectively being silent. And I think that silence is deafening. I'd love to hear your view from an NGO perspective in your day job and as a stakeholder of the future. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, you're not the first or probably the last person.
Be the last one.
It's a very, very obvious thing. And again, I just want to clarify, I'm not representing officially SBTi's voice here.
No, of course not.
But as an observer of the market and somebody who's personally quite, building a career around this area, it's my understanding that there is a shift that needs to happen. And that's true. So what you alluded to, the beyond value chain mitigation, that's really SBTi's attempt, in my perception, to start to say, okay, there needs to be a high quality demand in the market for carbon markets because they are an important piece, because financing green is important. And so I think if
that happens, that'd be great.
I think it's their version of it.
Sure. I think it's implied, but it's not implicit.
It is not.
I think that we need to kind of get through that funk. And it's a process, so I'm not going to put undue pressure. But essentially, I'm just saying, hey, guys, have you thought about this? It would be really great to have it.
And I do agree that it would be great to have it because I think it gives instruction. And you're right, companies are struggling to understand where are we on this ground. Like we see, and especially if you talk about Singapore in the carbon tax, you have the little 5% window to be able to do carbon markets. Now your government is saying you can. And so now you as a company, you're saying, okay, now I have this sort of two things. I do want to recognize though for SBTi, right? If you look at where they're coming from, they're saying if you want to be net zero compliant, your value chain emissions need to decrease. So for example, in the generic format, it's 4% year on year. Yeah. So they're saying in the net zero scenario, you actually cannot not reduce that because the forest stock or the carbon market stock we have is only able to account for certain amounts of budget. Sure. So if everybody takes the point of view where we want to not do value chain, but we want to create high quality demand, there's only a limited amount of sequestration you can even get from those markets. And I think that's where IPCC's recent, the AR6 is also talks about, I think nature-based solutions give the potential of 30% mitigation.
But now we're talking gigatons.
30% of carbon budget to 2030
sure, okay,
is coming from forest and nature things, right? But what the question is if you save all the nature there's still a huge gap of mitigation that lies outside of carbon removal markets. Having said that, I do recognize, and I think this is something that where we can't actually choose anymore, we have to do both.
Both at the same time. Yep.
Is you actually don't have a choice not to invest in green, because where is that capital coming from?
Yeah.
You still need, there's a huge capital gap to save that 30% as well. So you have both things going on.
Yeah.
You have companies still having an internal budget that's missing, and you have finance that's missing. And I think people on your side of the fence, not that we're on opposite,
No, but it's
for
just
the sake of the argument.
Yeah, sure, exactly. Let's play devil's advocate.
They're not wrong in saying there is assets here that are underfinanced and they are getting ignored because you've put this wall that you can't actually invest on this side. But I think with the beyond chain value mitigation, what SBTi and what nonprofits are saying is like, you can do it. Don't count it towards your 4% reduction that you're obliged to do as a net zero pathway.
And I think from the markets piece, we will completely support that and agree and say reductions internally are absolutely critical.
Right.
And then we would counter and say markets are incredibly essential in this same trajectory. And they can actually be accretive, so that with an internal price signal, with an external price signal, it can actually help you to go up that marginal abatement cost curve. And I think if we all sing from that same hymn sheet, then we will start to see that traction.
And you see, I think, look at Singapore as an example of the policymakers actually making that choice for companies that actually gives them some sort of instruction sheet. But I will say the bigger problem in all of this is that we don't have a clear pathway to net zero. Sure. And that's what complicates this conversation with corporates.
But it's an audacious task. Let's just not circumvent this. This is not just the Marshall Plan of our generations, but this is a transformation around everything that we do. And the dependency that we've had over the last 2 centuries, essentially, on fossil fuels is something that we're asking to be weaned off of. And it's very difficult when you have a society that is energy intensive. So now we need to help a transition. And that's going to have multi-stakeholders, going to have multi-solutions, going to be across all sectors. And it's just an audacious task. So, hey, that's again, coming back to the youth voice. This is why it's incredibly important, not only for your generation and the generations after you to be heard, to be emboldened to take on this monumentous task.
And I think if I could just add one last aspect, actually, to sort of talk about something I've learned through youth engagement, through the work with nonprofits, through like my own education, is that there is no choice but to embrace the complexity of it. There is no black and white. There's no this is good, this is bad, this is a good guy, this is a bad guy. I think we're way past that point, and embracing the complexity of it, which I think they're doing. Everybody is starting to get into the nitty-gritty of things. That devil is in the details. 10 metaphors to explain that specific thing.
It's good metaphors.
But I think that's going to sit at the center of a lot of this transformation. It's the details. It's what actually happens on ground, how it gets accounted for, what are the policies that underlie it. And I think, back in 2001, you could say, oh, recycle to save Mother Earth. We've flew past that sort of, statements. And not that in 2001 we were, comfortable saying that, but I'm saying that we've...
but things evolve and they transform. And like you said, it's about impact and it's about execution. Execution.
And data. And we have too much information.
Oh, no, totally.
And we need to do something with it. And that's where I think we have the ability to influence meaningfully. And that's where the young people are now starting to embrace it. And they are getting stronger. And I hope that trend is only on the increase now.
I hope so too. Swati, that was fabulous. Thank you so much. Thank you for inspiring young people, but also older people, really, with that energy and that infectiousness. Keep going. I'm rooting for you, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
thanks for being my guest. Cheers.
Thank you.
Awesome. Oh, fucking high five.
That was great.